At Christmas dinner, my husband's family gave toasts praising everyone except me. His father chuckled. Guess you didn't make the cut this year. My husband just grinned along with them. I raised my glass and smirked. That's fine. I didn't forget to make my own toast. Their faces fell as I delivered my speech, and the realization hit them hard. But before we continue, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to keep the channel alive. At Christmas dinner, my husband's family gave toasts praising everyone except me. His father raised a glass and chuckled. Guess you didn't make the cut this year. And my husband? He just grinned with them. So I smiled, and I raised my own glass. That's fine. I didn't forget to make my own toast. That was when everything changed. But we weren't there yet. Let me start from the beginning. I've been married to Ethan for 6 years, together for 8. And in all that time, I've never really belonged in his family. I've tried. I really have. But no matter how many dinners I attended, how many polite smiles I gave, or how many gifts I brought, it never mattered. Because Ethan's family wasn't just close, they were exclusive. They kept a tight circle, and I was always just outside of it. His mother, Elaine, led the charge. Every gathering was a production, and Elaine made sure I always knew my place in it. Background. She was the kind of woman who weaponized politeness. Her smiles never reached her eyes. Her compliments always had a sting hidden just beneath the surface. Oh, you made this? That's so brave. You wore red? I wouldn't dare. That sort of thing. Constant. Exhausting. Intentional. His father, Rick, was a little more direct. Less smiles, more jabs. He had a way of laughing when he insulted you, like it was just a joke. Except it never felt like one. And then there were his sisters, Maddie and Lila. One lawyer, one fashion influencer. Both beautiful, sharp, and inseparable. They treated me like a seat filler. Like I had somehow wandered into their lives, and no one wanted to be the one to tell me to leave. The first couple years, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe they were just slow to warm up. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. But then the patterns became impossible to ignore. The family photos where I was conveniently cropped out. The inside jokes that started the moment I walked into a room. The Christmas cards addressed to the Winstons, Ethan plus family. No mention of me. The holiday party invitations sent to Ethan's email, with the assumption he'd fill me in. He rarely did. When I brought it up to him, he'd brush it off. They're just old school. You're overthinking it. When I asked him to say something, just once, he wouldn't. You want me to start a fight over a card? And I let it go. Because I loved him. Because I wanted it to work. But deep down I knew. He wasn't protecting me. He was preserving the illusion. Christmas was always at Elaine's house. The woman lived for it. Her home looked like a Pottery Barn catalog threw up in it. Giant wreaths on every door, garlands wrapped around every stair rail, and a perfectly color-coordinated tree in every room. Gold in the entryway, blue and silver in the dining room, candy cane red in the kitchen. Even the bathrooms had festive hand towels. She started planning Christmas in August. Every year. And she reminded us all of it at every chance. I just want everything to be perfect. What she really meant was, I want everything to look perfect. We arrived on Christmas Eve afternoon. Ethan and I had driven 5 hours from our place in Pennsylvania to the Winston estate in Connecticut. A long drive, made longer by the tension between us. He'd forgotten to help me pack. Again, he'd spent the entire ride half listening to a podcast and nodding at my small talk without replying. We'd been in that awkward, quiet phase for months, still married, but not really talking. I wore a green velvet dress and curled my hair. I'd brought homemade cookies, wrapped in a decorative tin with ribbon. I carried gifts, labeled neatly, placed them under the tree when no one was looking. Elaine answered the door. Her eyes swept over me once, briefly, then landed on Ethan with joy. My baby. Oh, look at you. Hug, kiss, smile. She turned to me. You're here. That's nice. And then walked back inside. Maddie and Lila were already drinking champagne in the sunroom, laughing over something on Maddie's phone. They barely looked up when we walked in, just raised their glasses and said, hey, in unison, like we were at a cocktail party, like I was a stranger. Rick was in the kitchen with a bottle of scotch, telling a story to the neighbor. He looked at me, smirked, and said, didn't expect you to make it. Ethan laughed. I didn't. Dinner was a blur. Elaine had hired a private chef this year. Everything was plated like a magazine ad. We weren't allowed to serve ourselves. The portions were small and cold. I made polite conversation, asked Lila about her boutique, congratulated Maddie on her promotion. They gave one-word answers, changed the subject, talked around me like I wasn't there. And Ethan? He didn't say a thing. When dessert was finished, Elaine clapped her hands and stood. Before we all opened gifts, she said, let's take a moment to give thanks and celebrate the people who've made this year so special. She raised her glass. To Maddie, for making partner at just 32. To Lila, for her brand expansion and for being the most stylish woman I know. To Rick, for finally retiring after 40 years. And to Ethan, for always being the glue that holds this family together. Applause. Smiles. Toasts. Elaine sat down, looked right at me, then raised her eyebrows slightly. Oh, I suppose. Well, we're thankful you made the trip. Rick laughed, then said it. Guess you didn't make the cut this year. Everyone chuckled, including Ethan. I didn't. I smiled. I reached for my wine. Took a small sip. And then I stood. The moment I stood, the mood shifted. Laughter faded. Eyes turned. The clinking of silverware stopped. Even the wine glasses seemed to pause midair. They were confused. Not alarmed, just puzzled. After all, I wasn't supposed to interrupt. That wasn't my role. My role was to smile quietly, laugh when they laughed, and stay invisible. I didn't play that role anymore. I held my glass up, calm and steady. To family, I said. Elaine tilted her head. Maddie blinked. Rick poured himself another inch of scotch like he was bracing for a boring speech. To the people who lift each other up, who make space at the table, who remember your name when they're giving thanks. No one smiled now. To those who don't just show up to make a scene, but actually see the people sitting across from them. My voice was clear, smooth, no shaking. I'm thankful too, for what this year has taught me, for what silence reveals, for what fake smiles cover up. I set my glass down, gently, deliberately. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a black folder. Slim, clean, tied with a red ribbon. The room was dead quiet now. I brought a gift of my own. Elaine's smile cracked. Maddie let out a quiet. What is that? I walked to the head of the table and placed the folder in front of Elaine. It's for you, I said, but you might want to open it slowly. She didn't move. Not right away. She looked at Ethan, then at Rick. No one said anything. So she opened it, untied the ribbon, opened the flap, and pulled out the first page. Her eyes scanned it. Her brows twitched. She flipped to the next page. Then the next. Her hands began to shake. Rick leaned over to look. Maddie and Lila stood from their seats, circling behind her. Ethan didn't move. Elaine stopped at page 5, stared at it for a full 10 seconds before speaking. What is this? She said, voice tight. You can read, I said calmly. Keep going. She did. And then I saw it, the moment the truth landed. It was always just beneath the surface, with her. That glimmer of fear, the edge of panic behind the control. Now it was exposed. The folder contained documents I'd been compiling for months. Photos, invoices, emails, logs, proof that Rick had been having an affair with a woman named Linda, his business associate. A woman he had been paying rent for. A woman who had used Elaine's money to buy herself a new SUV. A woman whose bank account was directly linked to Rick's private investment account. Elaine's hand flew to her chest. Her mouth opened, then closed. Maddie froze. Lila gasped. Wait, what the hell? I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because the truth was speaking for me now. Rick said nothing. Maddie grabbed the papers. Are these real? I nodded. Dated. Time-stamped. Pulled from public records and credit reports. I included a summary at the end. Elaine's fingers clenched the folder. You've been snooping through our finances? No, I said. I've been ignored by your family for 6 years. So I started paying attention. Rick stood suddenly. His chair scraped against the hardwood. This is private. No, Rick, I said. This is Christmas. And we're all supposed to be honest about what we're thankful for. So I'm thankful for the truth. Ethan finally spoke. Why would you do this? He said it softly, confused, almost betrayed. I turned to him. You let them humiliate me, over and over, and you laughed along with them. You told me to stay quiet, to be polite, to not start drama. You chose comfort over me, every single time. He didn't deny it. He didn't argue. He just looked down. Elaine stood up next. Her voice was sharp. You think this makes you look strong? You're pathetic. You dug through our lives just to ruin Christmas. No, I said. You ruined Christmas years ago when you decided I wasn't part of your family. This is just cleanup. Maddie and Lila were still flipping through the documents. Their expressions changed with every page. Shock, confusion, then suspicion. Maddie looked up. Wait, this says the money came from Mom's retirement fund. Elaine turned pale. Lila took the paper and scanned it. You told us that account was untouched. Rick opened his mouth, then closed it. Maddie's voice rose. You let her keep that account in your name. You made us think it was secure. That money was supposed to be for Mom. Elaine stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time. You used my name on withdrawals? I didn't think. No, she said sharply. You didn't. The tension in the room was no longer cold. It was boiling. Elaine stepped away from the table and sat down on the couch, the folder clutched in both hands. Rick followed her, trying to explain, but she held up a hand. I don't want to hear it. Maddie was still standing. How long have you known about this? Since October, I said. Why didn't you say anything? Because no one listens to me, I said. You all made that very clear. Elaine shook her head slowly. You're vindictive. No, I said. I'm thorough. There's a difference. Rick's voice cracked. You don't understand. Linda, she wasn't. I raised a hand. Don't. He stopped talking. I turned back to Ethan. I begged you to stand up for me. I told you how they treated me. You said it wasn't that bad, that it wasn't worth the fight. And now, I gestured at the wreckage around us. This is what you chose instead. Ethan's face was unreadable, but I saw the guilt, the cracks, the pieces falling. I didn't think it would come to this, he said. I nodded. That's the problem. You never think about anything until it's too late. Elaine was still quiet. She had stopped looking at anyone. Maddie and Lila weren't talking either. Everyone was sitting in their own silent orbit, waiting for someone else to make the next move. But I already had. I grabbed my coat from the chair, slipped it on slowly. I'll have someone come get my things next week, I said. Ethan looked up, alarmed. What do you mean? I mean I'm done. Maddie took a step forward. Wait, are you leaving him? Yes, I said. Because I'm not waiting to be chosen anymore. No one said a word. And so I walked to the front door. Quiet. Calm. Complete. I paused at the threshold. Looked back one last time. Elaine was still holding the folder. Rick was staring at the floor. Ethan looked like a man who had just realized the ship was sinking and the lifeboats were already gone. No one followed me out. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't raise my voice or throw a single thing. I just left. And for the first time in 6 years, it was silent in my head. No voice telling me to just let it go. No looping replay of what I should have said. No guilt for finally choosing myself. Just the cold December air, the crunch of snow under my boots, and a feeling in my chest that I hadn't recognized in a long time. Peace. I drove away from the Winston estate without looking back. The house faded into the dark like a dying stage set after the final act. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just drove, 1 mile at a time, toward a version of myself that no longer had to explain why being treated like an outsider wasn't okay. I spent the night at a hotel 20 minutes outside the city. Quiet place. Clean lobby. No questions asked. The room smelled faintly of lavender and lemon, and I wrapped myself in a blanket and stared at the ceiling for hours. I thought I'd feel broken, but instead, I felt awake. The next morning, my phone was a war zone. 10 missed calls from Ethan. 3 from Maddie. 1 from Lila. A single text from Elaine. I hope you're proud of yourself. And 1 from an unknown number. We need to talk. I'm Linda. I stared at that last message for a long time. Not because I didn't expect it, but because part of me already knew what she wanted. She didn't want to apologize. She wanted to control the damage. And I wasn't in the business of helping people clean up messes they made while stepping over me. I ignored every call, every text, every voicemail, except one. Maddie. I agreed to meet her at a diner the next day. Neutral ground. Public space. A place where emotions would be forced to behave themselves, at least a little. She arrived exactly on time, wearing sunglasses and no makeup, which for Maddie was the equivalent of showing up barefoot. She slid into the booth and didn't speak for a full minute. Then she looked up. You blew up our family. I stirred my coffee slowly. No. I held up a mirror. She didn't argue, just sighed and took out her phone. She pulled up a photo, turned it toward me. It was a screenshot of a document I'd included in the folder, one that showed a $25,000 withdrawal from a retirement account. The one Rick had told everyone was secure. The one that had Elaine's name on it, but Rick's signature. We didn't believe it at first, Maddie said. We thought you faked it. Thought maybe you'd lost it and wanted revenge. Why would I fake that? I didn't say it made sense, she said. Just that we wanted to believe something easier. And now. She paused, tapping her nail against the mug. Now Mom won't talk to anyone. She won't answer our calls. She locked herself in the bedroom the day after you left. Dad's sleeping in the guest room. Ethan's crashing at our place. Lila hasn't stopped crying. I didn't feel bad. I just felt done. You think I wanted any of that? I asked. Maddie looked up, caught off guard. I didn't want to destroy anyone, I said. I wanted to be seen. I wanted someone, anyone, to say, hey, maybe this woman who's been sitting at our table for 6 years deserves more than a pat on the head and a fake smile. I know, she said quietly. Do you? I asked. Because I tried to be part of your family. I showed up. I stayed quiet. I ignored the jabs, the whispers, the accidental exclusions. You all treated me like a footnote. And Ethan let it happen. Every single time. Maddie looked away. Her voice was tight. I don't think any of us realized how far gone he was. He wasn't gone, I said. He was comfortable. That's worse. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she spoke again. Are you going to divorce him? I didn't answer right away, because part of me still remembered the version of Ethan I married. The one who stayed up late helping me build IKEA furniture. The one who kissed my forehead every morning without fail. The one who used to say, you're my favorite person. But that version hadn't existed in a long time. He'd been replaced by someone who looked away when I was hurt. Someone who shrugged when I said I felt alone. Someone who laughed at his father's cruel jokes instead of stopping them. I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm not going back to that house. And I'm not pretending everything's okay. Maddie nodded. I think you were the only one brave enough to do something. Wasn't about bravery, I said. It was about survival. The next week was chaos. Elaine's catering business, the one she had worked on for over a decade, went offline. Word got out that she was under review for financial discrepancies. Not because of me. I hadn't reported her. But someone had. Probably one of her former employees. Or maybe a client. All it took was a spark. And I'd left plenty of those behind. Rick moved into a short-term apartment. Maddie and Lila cut contact with both parents for a while. Not because they hated them, but because they needed space to figure out how much of their childhood had been built on half-truths and financial lies. Ethan called me every day, texted, emailed, left notes on my windshield, messages through mutual friends. At first, I ignored them, but on the 10th day, I finally answered a call. He sounded broken. Can we talk? He asked. Please. I need to explain. There's nothing to explain. Yes, there is, he insisted. You have no idea what I've been going through. I almost laughed. What you've been going through. I repeated. You watched your wife be treated like trash for years and said nothing. And now that it's inconvenient, now you want to talk? I was scared, he said. You were selfish. There was a long pause. Then, quietly, I know. He begged to meet. I agreed one time. One conversation. One chance to say whatever he needed to say. We met at a park bench near the river. No restaurant. No home. Just open sky and the sound of water, in case I needed an excuse to leave early. He looked older. Like the last 10 days had aged him 10 years. His eyes were red. His hair was a mess. He didn't try to touch me. He just sat. I messed up, he said. I didn't respond. I let you fight alone, he continued. And I pretended that wasn't a choice. But it was. And I chose wrong. Over and over. Still, I said nothing. I don't expect you to come back. I just want to say I'm sorry. For not standing up. For laughing with them. For making you carry all of it. You didn't just let me carry it, I said quietly. You made me question if it was even happening. His head dropped. I know. We sat for a while longer. Eventually, he looked at me. Are you going to file? I already did. He nodded. Slowly. Then, I still love you. I believed him. But I also didn't care. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The final piece had fallen into place. And I didn't miss him. Not his voice. Not his touch. Not his family. Just silence. Beautiful, undemanding silence. It's strange what happens after everything falls apart. You imagine screaming matches, burning bridges, people sobbing in driveways, explosive confessions and dramatic exits. But when the dust settles, it's not like that. It's quiet. People stop calling. Or they call too much. They don't know what to say, so they either say everything or nothing. The people you thought would hate you, thank you. And the people you thought would understand disappear. It's like everyone is rearranging the pieces of their reality to make sense of what's left. Elaine called me 3 weeks after I left. Her voice was different. No smugness. No sarcasm. No performance. Just a tight, shaking sort of desperation. I don't know what to do, she said. I was sitting on the floor of my new apartment. Bare walls, half-unpacked boxes, one flickering lamp on the end table. My life felt like it had been stripped back to its bones. Clean. Empty. Honest. Then do nothing, I told her. Sit in it. She didn't like that answer. She cried. Or tried to. I could hear the breath catching, but the tears didn't come. Not real ones. Just that breathy, cracked voice that people use when they're trying to sound hurt enough to get sympathy. I was trying to protect the family, she said. No, Elaine, I said. You were trying to protect your image. And now that it's gone, you want someone to feel bad for you. I lost everything. No. You just lost the control you thought you had. She hung up. I haven't heard from her since. Rick reached out next. A single email. Short. Precise. The way he always was. Subject line. I owe you an apology. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. Just let it sit there in my inbox like a small, unopened confession. According to Maddie, he'd moved out permanently. Rented a small townhouse on the edge of town. Bought himself a used truck and started doing handyman work for extra money. No more investment games. No more secret condos. Just tools and dust and silence. He stopped drinking. Started therapy. Maddie says he's trying to be a better person now. I believe her. But it doesn't change the past. Ethan tried again. One last time. It was a letter. Handwritten. 6 pages. Folded carefully. Delivered to my apartment by courier. He didn't beg me to come back. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just told the truth. He wrote about the first time he noticed his mom treating me coldly, and why he said nothing. About the time he overheard his dad mocking me in the kitchen, and chose to pretend he didn't. About how he thought if he ignored it long enough, things would just smooth over. That I'd get used to it. That they'd warm up. He admitted he was afraid of confrontation. Afraid of breaking the illusion of the perfect family. Afraid that if he stood up for me, he'd be pushed out too. But then, he said something I didn't expect. He said I was braver than him. He said I'd done the thing none of them could. I told the truth. And he said that no matter what happened, he'd never forget that I tried. That I fought for something better when the rest of them were too scared to move. It wasn't a plea. It was closure. And for the first time in a long time, I cried. Not out of pain. Not out of regret. But because, in some strange, sad way, he finally saw me. And it was too late. The divorce was quiet. No fights. No lawyers circling like vultures. Just papers, signatures, a final meeting, and 2 people sitting across from each other at a wooden table, realizing they were done trying. Ethan didn't ask for anything. Neither did I. We split the accounts, sold the car, and walked out of that courthouse like strangers. He offered me a ride home. I said no. He didn't argue. Maddie and I talk sometimes. She says the family still doesn't mention me. That Elaine acts like I never existed. That Rick's name comes up only in whispers. But sometimes she defends me. At dinners. At events. When the subject gets too close to the truth, she clears her throat and says, well, maybe if we'd listened, things wouldn't have gone the way they did. She told me something recently. Something that stuck with me. She said Lila found an old video on her phone, Christmas 2 years ago. The whole family was sitting around the fire, opening presents. Laughing. Toasting. I was there. Quiet. Smiling. Holding a mug of cider in the corner. In the entire 10-minute video. I didn't speak once. Not because I wasn't allowed to, but because no one asked me to. She said watching it made her feel sick, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. And that, I think, is the part that hurts the most. It's not just the cruelty. It's the silence, the invisibility, the years spent shrinking so someone else could stay comfortable. My new apartment is small. 2 rooms, 1 balcony, creaky floors. But it's mine. Every corner, every sound, every moment of silence. There's a plant in the window I haven't killed yet. A stack of books on the floor. A candle that smells like cedar and clean laundry. Sometimes, I wake up in the morning and forget where I am. Then I remember. I'm free. I still get questions from people. Friends. Old coworkers. Distant relatives. Wait, you really left on Christmas Day? Didn't that ruin everything? Couldn't you have waited? Why would you do that to his family? And I smile. Because they don't get it. They think the explosion was the betrayal. But they didn't see the slow burn before it. The years of exclusion. The 1,000 tiny cuts. The way I bent and folded myself just to be allowed in the room. Just to be invited. Just to be acknowledged. They didn't hear the laughter when Rick mocked me. They didn't see Elaine's polite contempt. They didn't watch Ethan stay quiet while I was erased. No, I didn't ruin Christmas. Christmas just happened to be the day I stopped pretending. Sometimes I wonder if they sit around that big table now and feel the absence. If they look at the chair I used to sit in and remember the woman who smiled through 6 years of being left out. Or if they tell themselves I was the problem all along. It doesn't really matter. I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped crossing it. The other day, I stood in line at the grocery store behind a woman and her husband. She was laughing about something on his phone. He looked at her like she was the only person in the store. She leaned into him. He kissed her on the cheek. And it hit me. I want that. Not a husband. Not a perfect life. Just to be seen. To be someone's first thought, not their last defense. And next time, I won't settle for less.